Right, welcome back, and back to you, Dr. Sherif. And as you see, we are speaking today about the Egyptian foreign policy. But before we start with the Egyptian foreign policy, let us recall the 30th of June revolution and how the world perceived such a revolution and then, and how it perceives it today.
Well, 8 years ago, when this revolution started, I think that the world was amazed because they didn't realize that Egypt had this effort to struggle and fight for its democracy. The people voiced their eagerness to build a better future for their children. They thought, the world, the international community, they thought that this was the end of an era in Egypt, and then that Egypt will go on as what it was at that time. Unfortunately, at that time, the West, because I was in contact with several of the think tanks outside of Egypt at that time, and they had this vision that we will be like Syria and other countries, Iraq, and maybe the country will be heading to a civil war. And I always said, you don't understand the Egyptian people. They have this force inside. They keep silent for a certain time, but when they determine to take an action, they will do it. And let's not forget the war of 1973, the 6 October War. Everyone in the international community thought that it was over for us. And then we said, no, this is not the end of the story. And we made history militarily. So afterwards, in 2013, it was the same thing. And I always said, you would be amazed when the people will go to the streets. No one will stop them. So I think that the picture was very obvious for the mainstream media outside of Egypt. Tried in a way or another to show it as it was something pushed by the military. We are witnessing and we are giving the message to the world that it was the people who walked to the streets and asked the army and the police to stand with them, because we are one front. There is no separation between the army, the police, and the Egyptian people. So we acted all in defense of this great country. And we are proud that we have done that. That's why we are now showing the world that we are leading again in this region. Leading with peace, not with aggression. Leading with sovereignty, leading with integrity. And I repeat, that's not the end of the story. They will be amazed again and again and again.
Integrity. Integrity is one word that really describes our foreign policy always. But let me speak it from this perspective. In reality, after the 30th of June revolution, we have seen the mass media or the international media portraying it as a coup.
Yes.
And portraying the will of the people as a direct military interference to their will, and that everything was against that, or it was against all what they expected. Here, many issues or many factors played in portraying or in transmitting the correct of what really happened in the 30th of June revolution to the world, to the whole world. How did our diplomacy and foreign policy act in this regard? Because that was one of the most important role the Egyptian foreign diplomacy has done at this very critical time of Egypt, because we are aware what happened and then how we were threatened and all the challenges that were facing Egypt because of our ousting to the
dictatorship.
No, rather to the outlaw or the terrorist group, yes, or the leader of the terrorist group. And this is the correct description. Anyway, how did the Egyptian foreign diplomacy, or what was the role played by the Egyptian foreign diplomacy in this regard? And at the same time, how do you view also the soft powers that has portrayed the real image of what Egypt did at that time?
Well, we went through several phases. When Egypt amazed the world by this revolution, many countries thought that we will be isolated because they believed the lie that it was a coup, so that we will have lack of experience in diplomacy, that we will be an isolated country, that there will be no ways of dealing with the outside world, and then Egypt will be a closed country. They were amazed that the first thing we have done is that our diplomacy started acting everywhere, and it started acting with our allies. I mean by that, Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, like the Emirates. We have worked with them. You remember that we were banned from the African Union even. And then we said, well, we will start talking with many countries to explain it. We talked with Algeria at that time. We started explaining, and why was Algeria? Because Algerians went through the same history with terrorist groups who wanted to control the country. And the people started taking their revenge and taking the country back. So we had this kind of diplomacy of choosing to whom we should talk. And then we started advancing to the second level, which is the West. Let's not forget, of course, that there were international leaders like President Vladimir Putin, who understood that Egypt was defending its democracy, and he had excellent contacts with, at that time, Field Marshal President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi at that time, when he was Minister of Defense. And because he understood that there was a plan that Egypt would be destroyed, as they thought in some think tanks in the West. So he understood that Egypt has to defend itself. About the soft powers, of course, we had this mainstream media attack against us from Al Jazeera and other outlets in the West also. And whatever we would say, they will always insist it's a coup. Well, we played the game of the time. That time will show that these are lies who have no grounds, and that the people made their word and chose this new leadership in Egypt.
As you has just spoken about Al Jazeera, then one example is our relationship with Qatar 8 years ago and today.
Of course. and we didn't back an inch. We stood according to our principles, and we got what we want.
Okay, we'll speak about part by part, but let me here start from the very beginning and how the Egyptian foreign diplomacy prepared the ground for Egypt to show what really happened. And we recall how the president, or the leadership, since President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi assumed office, he was very keen to attend every United Nations General Assembly and meeting, and the several meetings that occurred at then. All the international forums, all the world organizations conferences, in order to give himself the real picture. So let me here take how the foreign policy that was represented by the leadership itself, because the president was keen to go into all those meetings himself. So it was really led by the leadership. How did that reflected the Egyptian foreign policy? Before I go to where did we go and how we did it.
Well, when President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was elected in the first free democratic elections, and I underline the word first democratic elections in Egypt's modern history, He was chosen by the people, and this was the power that he had, the mandate, as he said it several times before his election. He said, "It's you, the people, will be my force to act and work and talk." And this is what he has done. He took the plane, the presidential plane, and he went to the West directly to the main cities who were trying to portray that this was a coup. It was very courageous that he went by himself. And I remember when he went to London and to Germany, in Berlin, he faced also some critics from the press, and he acted very calmly, with all confidence. He didn't try to undermine their talking. He replied with patience,
wisdom,
explaining what took place in Egypt, smiling at the same time, and to the extent that I remember at that time, the Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, was really embarrassed because the questions were really very, very harsh. But President Sisi said, "I will answer everyone. We have nothing to hide. You have any criticism, I will answer it." And this was amazing. That's why afterwards, when he went to the Western countries, the press tried to sit with this man and talk with him, because he is not the kind of leadership that we had in mind in the Middle East, someone who would choose to whom he should talk. No, he talks with everyone openly, and he accepts the criticism and replies with wisdom, and this is how the real talk should be. So diplomacy had more than 50% of its effort done through one person, which is the president. He didn't work behind the scenes. He worked by himself as the image.
He went directly into confrontation.
Exactly, and explained every detail, not only to the leaders and the press, but even to the people in the Western countries who were afraid to come to Egypt because media showed that everything is deteriorating in this country. He spoke with them, and the people were amazed that this was a new leader who is openly talking to them.
So, 8 years. Let me here speak about the first 4 years and the second other 4 years, because things developed in a very positive way, and we have seen last year and this year dramatic changes in the whole course of the Egyptian diplomacy. The first 4 years, how do you describe the first 4 years, and how do you describe the foreign policy and the diplomacy of Egypt at those first 4 years?
The first 4 years were, I won't call it the build-up, but the struggle, because we were fighting terrorism inside of Egypt, and we had terrorist attacks even in the capital, and innocent civilians were killed. The army was attacked in Sinai, the police was targeted, everyone was targeted. And we had
a failure of the economy, very deteriorating. One, relationships, foreign relationships that are at their lower stands, please.
And we had this chaos in Libya and in the Mediterranean. Of course, everyone was targeting Egypt's precious riches there. So at that time, when we were fighting terrorism, what happened is that we were also fighting the criticism about the human rights, was used as a word to handcuff Egypt from working to defend its sovereignty. We were trying to find many laws to ban the terrorist groups, to stop them, to stop the NGOs who came in. I won't call it the NGOs, some groups who portrayed themselves as NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and who came to Egypt and opened centers. We didn't know where the money came from and why were they doing that. So we were fighting this battle, saying we are a sovereign country. You have to respect our laws, and we have to defend our laws. And at that time, the second phase started, which is the build-up. When we started to fight terrorism with security and really showing that we have an iron fist against all the terrorist elements. At that time, you remember the same groups starting attacking Europe. And when the Europeans started, and I was in France at that time, when they started having these laws restricting the security and telling the people we could arrest anyone because if there is suspicion of taking any part with any connections with the terrorist groups, we said, you see, you're doing the same thing that we are doing. Why is it permitted outside of Egypt and not inside of Egypt? So this was the rapprochement between Egypt and the West, that we have the same battle, the same enemy. You were attacking us, criticizing us, but now you see that we have to work together. And then President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi gave them the opportunity to work together with us.
Before I start with the second 4 years, because those have seen dramatic changes, I have to pay tribute and salute to those countries who stood by us at that time, and I mean here the Gulf area, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and all those countries who we have great respect for their stand and their backing to the Egyptians. Let me here take how Egypt dealt during the past 4 years, or the Egyptian foreign policy, starting with returning back to Africa, taking Africa as a first priority and returning to the heart of Africa and all its problems. How did you view the return of Egypt to Africa?
It was very smart. Why? Because once again, we didn't address only the governments, we addressed the youth of these countries. Remember that we had the youth conferences, and the African youth were invited in Sharm el-Sheikh, and President Sisi by himself was present, and he started talking to them and telling them, you have to work for your own country, immigration is not the solution, which was something very pleasing to the Europeans also, because they wanted to halt the immigration. So he was the man who made this, let's say, this equation that, okay, the African youth could stay in Africa, work for their countries, but we will have to help them economically so they could stay in their countries. So this was a very smart equation that he started. And then, at that time, when we were the candidate to head the African Union, no one.
We're speaking here that we started the issue with being freezed from the African Union.
Yes.
And ended 2 years ago with leading the African Union.
There was
now we're still until 22 the head of the Peace and Security Council at the
Yes.
African Union. Same with the United Nations, but we'll go to the United Nations, please.
By the way, there was this visit that many experts in the geopolitical field do not really understand, that President Sisi made a visit to Benin, which is a small country in Africa.
He made rare visits to, or first time ever visits by an Egyptian president to many of the African countries.
And after this
unprecedented.
After this visit, we were accepted again in the African Union. There was a secret about this country. That means that he studied very well the keys, how to unlock Egypt's freezing. That we should work with Algeria, Benin, and then he went to Ethiopia also, to the country that you remember at a certain time during the dark days before, when they said at the TV we will act against this country. Well, he took the plane and he went to Addis Ababa. And then he was the first Egyptian president to visit Rwanda, where the genocide took place, and Burundi. And he was the first Egyptian president to use the word brothers for the Africans. And the conferences were open in Egypt so all the African youth could come back to Egypt and study here. The pragmatism was very smart. We have shown the world at that time, and Africa, that you cannot neglect Egypt's role, that maybe Egypt made some mistakes in the past years before, in the past decades, working only with Europe and not working with the Africans. No, we showed that we are an African country, we have a role, and this is the cooperation. Let's not forget that the first economic cooperation in Africa was started by a project that Egypt represented, and we started working on it. Of course, it needs time, but we had the idea, like the European Union had at the first, this economic cooperation. So
the AfTA, the African Foreign Trade Agreement.
Yes, and Egypt was very eager to work on it.
Free trade agreement, the African Free Trade Agreements, yes, and it was really a glorious issue that we are proud of, that it was signed here in Egypt by almost all the countries who participate. Because before we continue on, because we have lots and lots of issues, I don't know if the foreign policy would take only one episode, but before we go on, Egypt's or Egyptian national security is a component of its foreign policy. Let's watch this report.
The close relationship between Egypt's foreign policy and national security has been widely underlined during the past 8 years. The multidimensional component of the Egyptian foreign policy affects issues of terrorism and extremism. These issues became top priorities in Egypt's action in regional and international forums. In June 2017, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi established the National Council for Combating Terrorism and Extremism. The role of the council is to demonstrate the state's counter-terrorism strategy to the international community, examining legislative decisions in countering terrorism internally and externally, pursuing the establishment of a special security entity between Egypt and other countries, cooperate with them to put an end to organized crime in the region. Egypt has been conducting many joint military drills with brotherly and friendly nations, such as the joint military drills with Sudan, dubbed Guardians of the Nile, with the participation of land, naval and air forces from the two countries. Guardians of the Nile aims to promote military cooperation between Egypt and Sudan, exchange relevant expertise and boost joint action between the armed forces of both countries. Also, the Egyptian and French air forces conducted a joint exercise using several multi-mission combat aircrafts. The exercise is part of the increasing partnership and military cooperation between the Egyptian and French armed forces. Furthermore, Egypt has been taking part in other military exercises with various states, both within the Middle East and around the world, from 2014 to 2021. Egypt has been an avid participant in exercises with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain and Kuwait. In May 2015, Egyptian and Russian naval forces participated in a military exercise in Alexandria, and in October 2017, Egypt and Greece took part in the Medusa 5 military exercise that took place in Rhodes. The issue of terrorism has topped Egyptian priorities in international forums. During his speech to the United Nations last September, President el-Sisi highlighted Egypt's position of encouraging the international community to cooperate in fighting terrorist organizations. The president stressed that the world, more than ever, needed a coalition of people and cultures to counter extremists threatening human civilizations. The year 2016 and 2017 were critical for Egypt since the country was both a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council and the head of its Committee for Combating Terrorism. During that time, Egypt stressed the importance of the Security Council's enacting new policies to stop terrorists from gaining weapons and addressing the phenomena of foreign fighters joining such groups. It is for such reasons that Egypt should now reposition itself as a leading power in the region, not only because of its vast size and important history, but also because of the strength of its military that has long enabled it to be a major player in the Middle East and North Africa.